Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I'm going to be your host today. Today's episode of Textiles and Tea is sponsored by the Fiber Arts Guild of Pittsburgh, producer of the Fiber Art International in 2022. If you'd like to learn more about this exhibit, or enter the exhibit, go to their website, fiberartspgh.org. We will take questions today. We always take them at the last 15 minutes of the program. If you would please put your questions in the Q&A. I can see the Q&A, but I cannot see the chat. We love your comments in the chat, but questions need to be in the Q&A. Today, we have Jessica Pinsky. Jessica is an artist and an adjunct faculty member at the Cleveland Institute of Art. When she was, along with the Cleveland Institute of Art, she moved all the weaving equipment and opened up this wonderful nonprofit organization called Praxis Textile Workshop, which she is the executive director. Jessica grew up in Akron, Ohio. She got a BFA from Studio Art in New York University in 2006. She has an MFA from Boston University in 2009. We are so excited to have her here. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, Kathy. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here, and hi to everyone listening from home. I'm so excited.
Great. I love the view behind you.
Thank you so much. I thought it was only appropriate.
We're going to talk more about that later. I'm sure everybody's eager to hear. First of all, let's do our first question, which is, what is your favorite tea?
Yes. Well, I brought myself an iced tea today to have for our conversation, as it is balmy 95 degrees and humid here in Cleveland, Ohio. But green tea is my favorite. And who doesn't love to drink tea and talk about textiles?
That's true. So how'd you get started in textiles?
I really started knitting and sewing from a really young age. I have these really early memories of helping my mom, who was an avid sewer and knitter, by pushing the sewing machine pedal. And she was always, as she, guided the fabric, and she was always doing a project and always including me in that project and allowing me to have that participation, creative participation from a really early age. So I would say as a kid. But when I was going through college and sort of figuring out what I wanted to pursue in terms of my career, I went to school for painting, and I love painting, and painting is a really important part of my practice. But I discovered around the time of graduate school that I really felt a connection to the material of textiles more than the material of painting. And that's when I really started weaving and getting really into it, as you can see behind me.
Well, that's my next question for you, because you have to be one of the bravest people I know, because you went through college, you're a painting major, you've done all this work, and then you're like, no, I really want to do weaving. So you didn't just take a different, direction and start weaving. You tore up a lot of your paintings, right? You destroyed them and made them into weavings. Can you talk some about that?
Yes. I think back about that time in my life a lot, because it was a real crossroads in my development as an artist. And I am so grateful that I took that leap. I had been carrying around these scraps of canvas for 6 or 7 years at this point. And I would wipe my paintbrushes off on them. It was like rags essentially. And but I thought they were beautiful. And so I put them in a trash bag. And every time I moved to a new studio, I would just take the trash bag with me. And one day inspiration struck, and I cut them all up according to dominant color, and I sewed them back together again. And so I brought my sewing knowledge into my studio for the first time. And this was in the middle of graduate school. And I was so excited about the sewing thread and how it was intersecting with the cloth. And it was so much cooler to me than the paint was. And so I thought, I think what's happening here is some kind of direction or towards weaving, this under and over and crossing of threads. And so that's when it got in my head like a bug, and you can't quite get rid of it. And so I acquired my first loom when I was still living in Boston right after graduating. And as soon as I started cutting up those scraps, it was actually really easy to cut up a bunch of paintings that I don't think I ever really loved to begin with. And I did love them in their cut up state. And I didn't ever feel like I was destroying anything. I only felt like I was making something new. And people always ask you, like, what's your favorite piece of artwork that you've ever made? And my answer is always the piece that I'm currently working on. I've forgotten everything that I've done before this very moment. I've moved on past it, and I'm most excited about this. And so that was it. And I never looked back after that.
That's amazing. I heard you mention that if you don't feel challenged or a little afraid, would you finish that statement?
Yeah, that was a really cool piece of advice that I had from a mentor in college whose name is Matt Nolan, and he's a ceramic artist based in New York City. And he is still a close friend. And he would say that you should, if you're not feeling challenged, then you should change something, And so that really stuck with me. And I think that inherently my personality is just a little bit like that. I don't want to be bored. I'm very goal oriented. So I like to stick with the next goal. And once it's achieved, I just am ready for the next one. And so, that always resonated with me. I think it's really easy to find something that you love doing in your studio and then keep doing it over and over again. But I think that advice has allowed me to take risks that I maybe wouldn't have otherwise. And it certainly was in my head that day when I started cutting up years worth of paintings. And it feels, I still think about it today. I think that I love to work in series because I do think that having many weavings or works in the same theme is helpful to really discover something new. And I think a lot of exploration and invention can happen with like a lot of parameters in that way. So, but then, once it starts feeling kind of like routine, then I want to have a new idea.
Oh, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about series, and so you describe your work as a combination. In this piece, Pythagorean, and this is from the Equal series, you have this beautiful overshot weave, nice and solid, but in the middle you have this lovely draping. It's just gorgeous. And it's very opposite, but it's very balanced. So would you talk some about this combination?
Yes, I would love to. I love this piece. I was so happy you picked it to talk about.
It's one of my favorites. I love this.
Everyone. Thanks. Okay, so let's unpack this one a little bit. It was I talked about that desire to work in series. So this was part of a series called the Equal series that was dealing first with the first parameter that I put on was geometric shapes. So it started, the first weaving in the series was based on a square. And so it was inevitable to me then to go on and talk about a triangle from the square weaving. So the basic idea, and I think we are going to get into this in the next question, but it seems like it's going to flow now to just say that this series coincided with the time of my life where I met my wife, and we had just started dating, and this was in 2015, and I was noticing for the first time in this relationship the inequalities towards women, also inequalities towards people who are in same-sex relationships that I wasn't necessarily paying attention to before that. And this was, of course, the same year that gay marriage was legalized in the United States. So I was thinking a lot about that, and I always think about this in terms of the metaphor of textiles, because we are all made of the same thing, but we behave really differently. And so I thought, could I take two pieces of textiles that are with the same parameters, but make them behave really, really differently? So it's two triangles side by side. If you imagine that it's woven kind of on its side, so the part that's draping is the warp, and the first triangle is woven with commercial yarn that was purchased from the store, and the second half was the same amount of yarn that I hand spun. So when it goes into the weaving, it packs in differently, it twists and contorts. And so the final result of the weaving has it kind of hanging a little off. And so that was the whole idea. And I love the droop in the middle and using yarns that have this really like soft silky drape. And so you'll see that come back in later works, that I'm still playing and experimenting with that in terms of my textures and materials. And the idea of Pythagorean, and that's why that's the title of the piece, is that I used the Pythagorean theorem as I was planning the piece. So I have like my whole sketchbook for this piece has like no color in it. It's just like this blue ballpoint pen and like lots of math equations. And I was trying to figure out how to make that little ladder or staircase to be the side of the triangle and have it be the right size. And so I used the Pythagorean theorem, and I remember thinking in middle school when I learned the Pythagorean theorem, there's no way that I would ever use this. And here we are. So that's a shout out to like all the geometry teachers out there.
Every math teacher in the world's going, there we go.
I know, like though they are listening. Yeah.
That's right. Somebody was asking, what's the size of that piece?
It is about 60 inches by 60 inches. It falls in like a 60-inch, 5-foot. It's a 5-foot weaving radius on the loom. So it changes a little when it gets drooped, but.
Okay. Another image, this next image that's coming up is also from the Equal series. And in this one, you use the twist of the yarn to get this texture, this change in surface, right? Can you talk some about that?
Yeah, I have to say that when I started weaving in the early 2010s, it wasn't just weaving. It was like, oh my gosh, every single process is more magical than the next. You know, I was learning everything as an early adjunct faculty. In my first position at Cleveland Institute of Art back in 2011 was the shop tech in the fiber department. And so I was just like a sponge soaking up all of this knowledge and processes that I didn't get in my painting programs. And so I learned how to dye wool, how to card, how to spin at that time. And I still think that spinning is one of my favorite processes. And I spent many years doing a lot of spinning, and I have many weavings that all of the weft is huge, 9-foot weavings where the weft is all hand spun. And right now is a busier time in my life, so I haven't done that as much, but I'm looking forward to having that as a skill to come back to in the future. So, what I love about it is that you have so much control over how the yarn turns out. And when you buy commercial yarn, you are, sort of at the mercy of how it behaves. So I was able to severely over twist and over contort the yarn as it was feeding into the spinning wheel, so that when it was woven, and then I did not set it, so I didn't like boil it or heat it after spinning. And then when I wove it into the weaving as the weft and took it off the loom from under tension, the whole weaving just like shrinks. And it's a really satisfying moment. So I appreciate that. It does relax over time. So there's probably some ways I kind of like that too. So I didn't really mind, but this was taken right when it comes off the loom, and it has a really, really, really big difference. And so this is a great example of that idea of equality, where it's the same exact amount of wool on one side to the other. And it's the same material. It's both wool, it's wool, black wool, but one of them is behaving very differently.
I love that you said how satisfying it was, because I was thinking I would love to have been there and watch it kind of do its thing. It's almost like yarn's alive, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it's moving and it's seeking its favorite place to be.
Yes, exactly.
I would love to have seen that. Now, these next images coming up are 3 of your works: Labor, Delivery, and Recovery. And this is from a series that you did about your very difficult and scary delivery of your twins. Now, was this a cathartic thing for you to do these pieces? They're so powerful.
Thank you so much. Yes. Short answer, absolutely. I mean, this has been something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. So my twins are now almost 2 years old. So our twins will turn 2 in August. And I haven't made that many weavings since they were born. There's a lot of amazing things happening. We're going to talk more about Praxis. I've since been awarded a full-time position at Cleveland Institute of Art. So I'm teaching full-time. Yeah, I know, it's amazing. And I'm loving being part of the community at CIA. And so I think that there are parts of your life where your art making practice ebbs and flows, and early childhood of your children is probably one of them for everyone. We're just like really, really busy, and they're your best art pieces anyway. So why would you want to not focus on them all the time? But there was and I had a wonderful, before I say anything, we're so fortunate to have been able to become pregnant and to have healthy children. And I think there's a lot about every single stage of pregnancy and childbearing that can be very, very difficult for very many people. And I really had a very wonderful pregnancy, but it was a high-risk pregnancy, being twins, and my delivery was very, very difficult. And so I had 29 and a half hours of labor, and then I was rushed to an emergency C-section and suffered a lot of blood loss and was close to having a hysterectomy on the operating table. And it was a long, hard recovery in the hospital for 5 days after that. So it was a really big traumatic life event. And I actually saw the red weaving, the center weaving, which is called Delivery, in the hospital. Like, I saw it in my head, and I knew that I was going to make that weaving. And so I was fortunate to have a few deadlines coming up that year, because who really does anything without a good deadline? And a wonderful show curated by my friend Tony Williams here in Cleveland called Ardent Thread. And it gave me kind of the push to realize the red weaving. And it was one of the only times I've ever made a piece of artwork where when it came out, it was the same as what was in my head. And so that was like a very satisfying experience. I have never had that ever before in my life. Like, something is always a little different in a good way. But this was cool. And I love that weaving. It really, if you see it in person ever, the yarns are really shiny, and it's about 45 inches by 45 inches. So it's got some scale, and it's like blood, but it's also very beautiful, which is sort of sums up that experience. Like, it was really hard, but it was really beautiful. But after I finished that weaving, I felt like it wasn't telling the whole story, because those 29 and a half hours were pretty unique to me in my life. And and they were dreamy, where I was like, just couldn't quite conceptualize what was happening. And you're kind of out of it anyway. And then they're still inside of me. And it was just a kind of a weird thing. And then when I was in the recovery, I felt so empty. I was like, oh, I had these people, they were with me, and now my son is in the NICU, and was great, but, was in the NICU for a few days. And our daughter was luckily in the care of my wife and my parents while I was recovering, but I felt really lonely. And so that weaving really represented that space. And I think what was a very traumatic event, without being able to process it through the creation of this artwork, I would have had a harder time healing. And it also gave me a platform to be able to talk about like a difficult birth experience, which is not a common conversation. And I think a lot of women, at least that I've talked to, have felt like there isn't a lot of space to have that conversation, even though it's pretty common story. So that's what this work was about.
Well, what I was wondering was, what was the reaction to this work? I could see some people being like, oh, we don't talk about that. And then some people going, oh my gosh, that's what I felt, or and everything in between. Did you find that? Did you see that?
I did. I found so much more of the second one that you just said.
Good.
Almost every person like, I relate to that. And not just women, men too, for their wives, for their family members, because things like that happen and it stays really private. And some people, that's a choice. And I would respect that a million times. But I think in a lot of cases, there isn't a lot of community around those experiences, just because it feels really shameful, and because you are really grateful about the beautiful, healthy children. And so you don't want to say something that takes away from that. But the way that I think about it is that experience, that happened to me, that was my experience. My kids have a beautiful birth story. They're doing great. But I get to have my own experience. There's so much I think you give up as a mother in terms of your own personal identity. And so I was clinging a little bit to the story of the birth because it felt like it was the last thing that was just mine, until you like totally sacrificed your life for your kids, right?
Women of the world are they're related. Mothers of the world. Now I'm going to go back to a statement that you referred to a while ago, I think, because I love this statement. It's great. That you said humans are made of the same materials, but they all behave differently. And I thought that's so appropriate, because it's true for humans. It's true for yarn. Yeah. That yarn can be made of the same thing, but they all behave differently. So would you talk about that statement, how it came to you, what it meant for you?
Yeah, I think it started because I think one of the things that Cleveland Institute of Art, I think, does really, really well, since the textile program specifically has dissolved into a new department called Sculpture and Expanded Media, but it's this idea of material exploration and giving a conceptual power to the materials that you're using. So like, what's the reason that you're using this yarn to talk about this subject matter in this piece of artwork? And so I was thinking really deeply about the decisions to use yarn to talk about my ideas versus paint. And so I always felt like when I was painting, there was a tool between me and the marks that I was making. Like I wasn't really touching anything. And with yarn and weaving, I'm like constantly, touching every single thing over and over again. Every piece of material passes through my fingertips, and I feel so connected physically to it. So then I think about, yarn, like you said, it's alive, literally. It's coming from, a cellulose fiber or protein fiber. It had a living, breathing life. There's of course synthetics, which are cool too, but for a lot of, in a lot of cases that is true. And so it just seems like a really perfect metaphor to talk about anything human. Any human experience, anything personal, because textiles is personal. I mean, we're all wearing these clothes, and we're all sleeping under blankets, and we talk about this at Praxis a lot, like, why should everyone learn this? And it's because we all use it. I mean, it's the same thing of learning about your food and why you're eating it. It's going into your body, it's going onto your body. So I think that thinking about your material that way is a really good practice. And I try to encourage my students to think about material in that way. And I think it just makes your own artwork feel like more meaningful. And I also think it's a way for me, I had a tendency as a painter to be really literal about everything. It was like, this is a painting of a tree, and it was just like about the tree. And so I like that there can be some abstract subject matter, there can be deeper meaning, and I'm not necessarily spelling it out for a viewer, but it's sort of behind the scenes.
Well, I love when you were talking, because my background is art therapy. And one of the things we studied a lot about was having distance between the material you're working with, finger painting versus paintbrush, so when you say that, I love that, because you're right. You really do touch the material, unlike a paintbrush or a drawing or whatever. So I get that. That is wonderful. Now, some of your work is very heavy and some of it is very, very light. Now, we've got examples of both here. This one is, the one on the left is Parameters in Primary Colors 1, right? And the one on the right is Dissection 4.
Yes.
And I guess I'm curious, do you find that you work on these at different points in time of your life? Or are you one of those wonderful people that you can just go back and forth from heavy, light, different kind of technique?
Yes, this is such a cool question. And I think it speaks really specifically to the way that I work, which is, like I told you, in series. So I am setting up a really strict set of parameters before I start a series of weavings. So the weavings, these are from two different series, but I would answer the same question, the same for both series. So the parameters are really more about size and color. And so I'm setting up like the pink weaving that's more open and flowy. That warp was going to be 40 inches wide, and it was going to be one of the primary colors are black. And I was going to leave openings in the warp. So if you're like it's actually, always on its side. So if you flipped it 90 degrees. So there, I would, have a couple yarns in the reed and then skip an inch or two more, skip an inch or two. And so all of the weavings were like that. And then the game, I guess you could call it, is for me to figure out how much variety I can achieve with those strict parameters. So in that same series, there are weavings that are really, really, really dense. You would never guess that there were any holes in the warp because I'm using such thick yarns and I'm maybe pulling them or scrunching them or letting them drape. And so the point of the exercise actually is to achieve the most lightness and the heaviest at the same, as part of the same series. So actually the weaving on the right that you picked, that's part of the dissection series, that one also has openings in the warp. So and then at every other pick, I was pulling, so one pick would be shot straight across, and then the second pick, whenever there was a hole in the warp, I would pull the weft out so it would drape, which created this like sort of shaggy pile kind of effect. And so that was like the whole fun for me, was trying to figure out how much variety I could achieve, and it was really fun. The pink one, that series was 16 weavings. And they were all like 40 inches. Mm-hmm. But the dissection series, there were 100, and there were 12, that weaving is 12 inches by 12 inches. So they were all they were 12-inch squares, and the goal was to make 100. And I was like, oh, they're small. So 100 is like nothing, but actually 100 is still 100. And it was, yeah, right.
Well, the next question kind of goes along with that, because what yarns do you prefer to use? Do you have a favorite? How do you choose the yarns? Because it doesn't look like they're all the same thing.
No, I am like a hoarder of yarn. And
I like that.
I think every weaver out there understands, like, you need them all. You need them all. I am so fortunate to be working here at Praxis Fiber Workshop, which is my organization I'll tell you more about in a little bit. We have a lot of yarn here. So I am able to experiment with things that I would not necessarily buy. And that allowed my practice to really grow faster than it would have, I think, without that resource. And I try to encourage our weavers here to really play and experiment, because it's done so much for my practice. But as far as the favorite goes, I like things that are that I think I like the yarns that behave in like a way that you wouldn't expect. So things that are really stiff or really silky, really shiny, glittery. But then it's like, who doesn't love an unmercerized cotton? I don't know, so I think I don't discriminate. I love them all. But I do seek out stuff that I think looks a little different, and then I put it off to the side and think maybe I'll use that someday. The red weaving, back to that dissection weaving, that was nylon, and super shiny, like nylon ribbon. And part of where I think my painterly approach comes in is in the warps. I usually have like maybe up to 20 or 30 different yarns in my warp, and that's to create a color undulating effect more than the texture. And I know that like some of you weavers out there are like probably cringing, because like, oh my gosh, like tension problems. And like, yes, I do have many tension problems, many, but I just ignore them, because you have to there's a sacrifice or compromise or something in there.
You have the personality that you can take on those challenges, I can tell.
Yeah, I have a lot of clamps in my studio. So like if there are pockets of the weaving that are drooping, I just like clamp them to something. Like tension is tension, right? Yeah.
Well, then let's talk about Praxis. You're the director of Praxis Textile Workshops.
Yes.
And if you would tell us a little bit about Praxis, does not look like heaven. Look at those looms. Oh my gosh, I want to go to Cleveland. Tell us how that's all happened. It's an interesting concept that instead of the university just closing down the program, they kind of morphed it into something else, and you're a key part of that.
Yes, thanks for that intro for Praxis. And that's exactly what happened. In 2012, CIA made the decision to downsize the fiber department and merge with the existing sculpture department. And they decided to keep some of the processes as part of the curriculum, but there really wasn't the room for the looms. At the same time, the school was making a move, and the just square footage was much smaller. And there's also, as you all know, it's a lot of specialized equipment that requires maintenance that if you don't have those skills, you can't maintain. And it was hard to find people, and the equipment was just kind of not being utilized to its fullest. And so I was I had just moved back to Ohio around the same time. I had just gotten the job at CIA and found a real community close to where I grew up, and felt like a really ideal way. And I was unwilling to let it end. And so I proposed to the school that they were a fiscal agent or sponsored us starting a new nonprofit organization. CIA is also a nonprofit. And this would be a community textile center where the classes and programming would be open to the entire community, but CIA students could use the facility and receive credit for classes taken there. So in a way, the curriculum is saved, it stays associated with the school, but it also morphs into something maybe bigger. And I think that it's a really visionary partnership between a nonprofit organization and a college. I think the landscape of academia is changing, as we see many shifts in many systems across our society. And this is, I think, a way that students can have a different, a different style of learning maybe. And it's been absolutely wonderful. We opened in 2015, and we just celebrated our 6-year anniversary, and it's a dream. It's completely changed my entire life. I was so naive when we started this project. I didn't even know the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit business. And since then, I've really taken on an entrepreneurial spirit in my life, and I felt really fulfilled doing that. I think that being a weaver lends itself to a lot of that left-brained like activity. And so being hyper organized and, financially, or just, in budgeting or planning, or just sort of doing an administrative task, it feels natural to me and I enjoy it. And so I'm grateful to have found it, because it's also changed my definition of what art really is, because I'm seeing how it affects my neighbors and like a very specific neighborhood. And then all the way to, we have a new digital weaving lab, and we have a TC2 residency in Cleveland for the first time offering this equipment in a residency in North America. So, we're able to serve so many different types of communities and see how weaving as a language is kind of transcending across them. And it's been a dream. It's really been a dream, a difficult dream at times, but a very, very good dream.
Well, it just sounds like it was a brilliant solution to a not so great situation. So I applaud you for that. And it seems like you have a great way of kind of thinking outside the box, because my next question is kind of along the same lines, was that I love your dye garden. And I think it's wonderful that you've started this dye garden in the city of Cleveland. So tell me how that idea came about and what was involved to really make it a reality.
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. So when we started to write the mission of Praxis, I was really thinking about educating about the really contemporary textile world, the landscape of contemporary textiles, but everything that falls within that landscape. And to me, that should be starting from the seed of the fiber, in this case, the dye, all the way to the most sophisticated technological equipment, which, we cover in our digital weaving lab with the TC2 and Dobby Looms. And then I think it has to include the fashion industry, because even though we're coming maybe from a textile, like a fine art background, coming from an arts college, and I have a fine art background, I think that the fashion industry is a really important connection to just the general population. And I think it's an important place to make a stance towards the environment and to see where the textile industry is affecting our, global pollution and just the environment in general. And so the dye garden to me represents two of those things, which is the connection to the garment industry or the fashion industry. It's the commitment to educating about the harmful impacts that the textile industry has done to this planet and how we can maybe amend them or change them or shift them. And then just educating about like where our fibers really come from and where that color really comes from. So it could have been so many things. We have an amazing project that is in Cleveland called the Cleveland Flax Project, where we're starting flax from seed and processing it. Not Praxis, but another very cool organization called Rust Belt Fiber Shed. And there were a lot of choices at that time about what the garden would be. But I, at the same time, met the artist that many of you may know, Roland Ricketts, who is a weaver and indigo grower in Bloomington, Indiana. And he is, just such a generous and knowledgeable wealth of information and knowledge. And we met at a conference, and I was completely fascinated and enamored with what he's doing and thought, this is so cool, and the more that I learn about indigo, the cooler it becomes to me. I think that its history in this country country, you know, coming from Africa. The indigo that mostly has been grown in the United States came from Africa during slavery. Indigo was the very first plantation cash crop, and enslaved Africans were made to use it in completely unsafe and unsanitary ways, and thus created this global trend of denim being the, you know, symbol of the working, you know, working class, not only working class, but now like really as a fashion icon and a branding kind of thing. So it's a fascinating history. I think it's really relevant to talk about that history now and to give space and credit and to think about indigo in an ethical way, in an environmental way, in an empowerment way for the African American community. And so we've just doubled down on it. You know, we're not growing the African species of indigo. We're growing the Japanese species of indigo like Roland does in Indiana. And the reason for that is that it just does better in the climate here in Northeast Ohio versus the African strain, which is mostly grown in South Carolina still in this country. So that's kind of why, but I think under the larger conversation about indigo, you know, we're having those important conversations, but we are actually processing it in the traditional Japanese way. So we're making tsukumo, which is the indigo leaf compost. We did that on a traditional composting floor, which we've built in our garage. And we're growing absurd amounts of indigo. It's a lot of indigo. And we actually, during COVID, we would usually gather in like these large groups, as you saw in that picture, to grow the natural dye, but we couldn't gather, you know, as a result of COVID, and we'd already started so many seedlings. So we asked folks to grow the indigo at home in their home gardens, and they would follow weekly videos that I put out. And this year, even though we've resumed our full-scale indigo growth, we have 4 vacant lots in Cleveland that we grow indigo on. And so we're talking about vacancy and about beautification and about education. But we also have 200 people that are growing indigo at home right now, you know, and they're going to give their harvested leaves to Praxis in exchange for using the vat at the end of the year. So it's a really cool program. I actually, I want to start it. I want to use Cleveland as a pilot. I would like to come to any city and start a similar program. I think that it's created a sense of community at a time when it's been hard to connect to people. And even now that like the world is resuming back to like, you know, a normal, it still seems like it's filling a void that people have. And so it's so popular, and I couldn't be more excited. So yes, we are just growing indigo, and it's taken on a whole new meaning, and we just love it.
Well, 2 things. One, I foresee you doing Convergence in 2024. I would love it. You know, even if I was just
there,
I would love to hear more about this. This is fascinating, and it could just be done everywhere. It's wonderful.
I think so too. And I think that the hardest part about it is actually the processing, like the compost part. Yeah. But if we're doing that at Praxis, you know, there's no reason leaves couldn't be shipped to us. We do the processing, and then we would send you back the tsukumo. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we could have an even larger connected network of indigo growers maybe across the country. And so yes, this is you're hearing the early phases of this idea. But you know, it's certainly working in Cleveland, and we're having a great time. And I would love to show anyone around that visits here.
Well, what's the community reaction when you know, people say, "What's the stuff you're growing? What does it do?"
Right. It's been amazing. And that's the best part, is like, this is where we're having those conversations, you know, on the sort of on the ground in the garden, not just in our lots, you know, but in now when we talk about it in the videos, and then that history and the information just, you know, it sort of grows exponentially, just word of mouth. And I think that that's how like the best information is passed. And so, I think it speaks for itself to me that we started last year with 75 people participating, and then with almost no, marketing, it just increased to 200 this year. And I just saw a comment that indigo is magic, and I do think that the indigo speaks for itself. It is a magical, amazing plant that people, when they experience it, they want to know more and be connected to it. So it's sort of it shares itself.
Yeah, somebody just popped up and said, well, actually, can't she do it for 2022? And it's like, well, everything's already done for 2022. We do want you in 24. So
who wants to babysit in that case? So.
There you go. We'll do that. Well, I've talked to other artists who are administrators from, where they work. And I'm always amazed that to be in charge and at the same time to kind of nurture your own creativity. How do you find that balance for yourself?
That's a great question. I think it's really hard. I think that it ebbs and flows. Like I really, I haven't felt any new like big sparks of inspiration or real need to be focused in my studio right now. Like once the delivery series was completed, I was so happy to just kind of keep focusing on my family, and we just bought a new house and we're renovating it, and that's been so creative and fun, and I think I've been pouring a lot of that creative energy into that. So I think that as long as creative energy is happening, that feels like a practice to me, and the balance I think is hard. When I was making those weavings, I was only in the studio for 1 hour every day. It was never like a day worth of weaving. It was what I made it very, very convenient. I set up a loom in my house. I made everything, really accessible so that even if I had a 20-minute window, I could pop in and get a little bit of weaving done. And I think that when our kids are in school, there will be a little bit more flexibility in time. So I'm not that worried about it right now. I think that I want to just like soak up every minute with them that I can. And I mean, everyone has always says that like this time goes so quickly and we're already feeling that. And so I'm trying to stay present, and the balance I think for me personally right now is actually between Praxis and teaching, and to make sure that both of those communities and opportunities are really well nurtured and supported. And so it's a hustle. I think a lot of us artists out there feel that way. This isn't the easiest life choice, but it's also there's no other choice. So I think that there's a lot of magic, and I feel mostly really, really grateful.
Well, you're a busy woman. You're hustling.
There's no question.
So what's next for you? What's your next major project you're going to take on, or do you know at this point? Or
I mean, as far as, my artistic practice, like I said, it's, there's nothing too big on the horizon. There's a great show being curated in Cleveland right now called Converge, which is an LGBTQ plus exhibition that's across 3 locations in Cleveland. And I'm really honored to be part of that. And at Praxis, actually, we're just like so excited about our digital weaving lab, which is directed by Catherine Amadei, which some of you may know, who's based in Ann Arbor. And Catherine's been coming to Cleveland, twice a month, pretty much for the last 5 or 6 months, getting this program off the ground. And so the digital weaving lab is located in the house next door to the building that I'm sitting in right now. And so it's a little mini campus at Praxis. And we have, I think, our 5th person in residence right now. It's Jovencio de la Paz, who's here from Eugene, Oregon. And so many amazing artists already who've come from all over the US. And we've just closed our applications for season 2, and we're booked almost through half the year of 2022 already. So it's like, I think, the energy around that loom and just digital weaving as a field right now is really exciting, and having it be part of the larger conversation at Praxis and showing people hear, you know, what's possible there and vice versa, has been really exciting. And it's taken, it's just become a whole new wave of energy here. So that's been the big focuses, I guess, that are coming up. And certainly excited for my next semester at CIA as well.
Now, do the students have access to the TC2?
That's a good question. I had Catherine come do a virtual workshop, because one of the things that we're offering is the file design classes virtually. So like you could take Catherine's virtual class, your files would be totally prepared for your residency on the TC2. So I had Catherine do a virtual class for my students last year at CIA, and we haven't woven those files yet, but at least that's a way for them to start to make this connection between image and weaving. So, and I'm super excited that my department chair, Sarah Paul, has gotten like really into it. She's going to be a resident in the 2022 season. And I think that we're just brainstorming more ways to have the students involved. And there's a lot of really cool ideas floating around. That's all I'll say.
Well, we got some questions for you.
Great.
Well, the first one's a shout out from Gail Dixon. She said, Medina, Ohio Weaving Guild loves Jessica and Praxis.
Yes, Medina, thank you, Gail.
Feel the love, feel the love.
That's cool, thanks so much.
Nancy, I think it's Riley. Do you have a favorite type of yarn for getting the drape?
I do, and actually it's a ribbon. It's a nylon ribbon, and that's like, I wish I had a better description for you, but I was really excited. I've only ever used it because it's been donated, and I've never sourced it, and I just got in touch with a Made in America Yarns mill, which is located in Philadelphia, and they're a really cool domestic mill making tons of really interesting effects yarns, and that is one of them. And I believe they called it a nylon ribbon, and I will be buying some from them. So that's where I'm getting the drape from. I haven't found anything that's a natural fiber that's doing the same exact thing yet. So if anyone has any ideas, like, I'd like to hear that.
They want to know, what kind of loom do you prefer? How many harnesses? And have you explored computerized weaving, which we've been talking about, but also you have that lovely Dobby
yes,
right?
Thank you for that question. My very first loom, it was as a countermarch loom. And so I think it's kind of funny, because I do think that most weavers that are starting today are learning on jack looms.
Yeah.
And so I am like sort of a lost child about that. I like love the countermarch experience. I just think they're so beautiful and elegant and quiet, and just like the whole balancing system to me, I really love it. But so I have a Cranbrook at home. It's an 8 harness Cranbrook that's a 72-inch weaving width. So I have a gigantic Cranbrook in my home studio, but the nice thing about Praxis is that every single project I can use a different loom if I want, and so can all of our members here. You know, they can switch, and that's one of the advantages, I think, of working communally in this way, is that you can change looms depending on your project. So the dissection series was done on a baby wolf, and the Dobby loom that Kathy, you just brought up, which is I don't know if you can see it behind me, not really, is a mechanical, it's a Compu Dobby that was converted to a peg system, an AVL. And I did a lot of the equal series on that just because it had a double back beam and I needed one. And that was the loom that had the double back beam. So I love all looms. That is part of my problem, is that I love them all, and I want to I don't want them all, but I want to save them all, and I want to give them all new homes. And I know a lot of you out there know of a lot of looms that need homes, and so we try to connect looms to folks here in Ohio. But it's a great question. It's hard to answer for me.
Well, Lori Duxbury, hi Lori, wants to know about the software you use for the TC2.
Yeah, great question. So the TC2, oh, and then I have not woven any of my personal work on the TC2 yet. I
Okay.
think I'm just giving space for the residents, and one day I will be a resident so that I can have time. But I so the loom itself comes with a program. The TC2 Thread Controller 2 is made by a company based in Norway and called Tronrud Engineering. It's like Digital Weaving Norway is the website. And it comes with its own software, but actually Catherine teaches all of her file design in Photoshop. So she feels really
Oh, really?
strongly that you do
Yeah.
not need any specialized software in order to create files for the TC2. And that is a big draw. So every single class that we offer on the TC2 is a Photoshop-based class.
I think that's what Lori is looking for, is that would you have to buy special software? Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, I'm probably going to butcher this name. Avalon Hamilton wants to know, are you familiar with the Indigo work of artist Abu Bakar Fofani Imali?
Yes,
Even
I am.
close?
Yeah, yes. And there's just so many. I am. And I think I watched a seminar at some point in 2020 from that artist. And that's another gift of COVID, I think, is that there's been so much amazing virtual programming in the past year, Textiles Tea included, that have given access to us, from all over the world to be connected around a common theme. And I've been seeking out a lot of those kinds of seminars. There's so many amazing traditions of Indigo, and I'm just really dipping my toe in, to be honest. Like, we have obviously doubled down on the Japanese tradition, but as I can't get enough, I want to learn more. We've had another amazing artist that's visited Cleveland named Gasali, and he has brought the African tradition and a workshop form to Cleveland. And I wasn't able to attend, but have lots of in common friends and have shared a lot of knowledge. So it's just my role as a student in this process is just beginning. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Have you done tapestry? Ronnie Green wants to know, have you done tapestry?
So not a lot. Not a lot, not personally. We offer it as a class at Praxis. I don't teach any of the classes at Praxis because you've heard me talk about like tension, right? So I'm not like the best weaving teacher in the sense that I will skip steps, important steps for beginners to learn. So, and I'm a self-taught weaver, and I think that I learned from the amazing Deborah Chandler Learning to Weave book. So, I think tapestry is like one of the most amazing. We have amazing tapestry weavers that are members here at Praxis, and I'm in awe and admiration, but I have not done a ton for myself in my own work.
Well, I cannot believe we've been talking for an hour, but we have. I've had such a good time this afternoon. You have shared so much about yourself and your work, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to the Handweavers Guild. And this has been a real pleasure, and I'm so looking forward to continuing to listen to Textiles and Tea and meeting many of you at Convergence in 2024.
There you go. If y'all want more information about Jessica and her work, go to her website, jessicapinsky.com. And you can also check out her website. We've posted it earlier, and it's also in the notes for Praxis. What is your website for Praxis? You want to say that one more time?
It's praxisfiberworkshop.org or .com. It both gets you there, and you can find out all about the organization on our website.
So get on that list and huddle up there for the take a workshop, take a class. I swear I'm moving to Cleveland. I want to take everything.
Great.
So, and I also want to say a very, very special thank you to the Fiber Arts Guild of Pittsburgh. They are the producer of the Fiber Arts International 2022, and it's a beautiful exhibit. They've done this. This is their 24th year doing this exhibit. And I swear, Pittsburgh is so lucky to have this group to put on this beautiful exhibit. If you want to learn more, you want to enter, please go to their workshop. Their prospectus is on their website at fiberartspgh.org. If you would like to sponsor Textiles and Tea or your guild or your business, there's more information online at weavespindye.org. Textiles and Tea is supported by the generous donations of the Fiber Trust. If you would like to see more programming like this, please support HGA by becoming a member or donating or both at our website, weavespindye.com. If you missed any part of this episode, or if you want to watch it again or you want to share it with someone, all the episodes are recorded and they are on the HGA Facebook page. The other thing is that we now are uploading it to YouTube. So if you would, you can subscribe to the HGA YouTube channel, and then you'll get a notice when the episodes are uploaded. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So go online and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you again, Jessica. It was wonderful. I hope you'll have a great week. Next week, we have the extraordinaire spinner, Joan Ruane. I'm excited to have her here. Hope you'll have a great week. And again, happy tea.